Good afternoon, colleagues. For those of you around the country, for most of you, it's probably in the central time zone, and it's certainly afternoon in Eastern time zone. For our friends in Hawaii, mahalo and welcome, and good morning to all of you. Before we get started, I want to introduce our special guest today, Dr. Sandy Carman. Sandy is a longtime, most importantly, a longtime friend. He was a client of the firm's for many years, and we're really happy that recently he joined our transitions division as one of our vice presidents. So Dr. Carman, down in Atlanta, welcome.
Thank you.
Great to see you.
I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to have joined the team.
Yeah, and we're thrilled to have your expertise, your experience as a practicing OD, and your experience in ophthalmology. And Dr. Carman also has an MBA, so he brings a wide variety and breadth of knowledge about our industry, which is kind of unique. And so we were very fortunate to be able to have you join us. It's great to see you, Dr. Carman.
Thank you.
Doctors, one of the things we're excited about, these are the 5 questions we think you ought to ask yourself or your spouse or someone, but certainly ask yourself before transitioning your practice. And so what we're going to do today, as we've done in many of our series, Dr. Carman and I are just going to have a conversation primarily with him about some of these questions and what he felt were significant decisions he had to make, and what his thought process was as he got ready to transition and ultimately sell his practice. So we'll just jump in. Dr. Carman, the first question, when did you know it was time to sell? I suppose that everybody who's on today with us, regardless of their age, a lot of times when I lecture at the optometry schools, the young doctors are in their 3rd or 4th year, and the last thing in the world they're thinking about is selling a practice. At that point, they're still trying to get through optics and physiology and anatomy and all those things. But when did you know it was really the right time to sell your practice?
Well, I've been in practice for probably about 30 years before I started thinking like this. And, it was really fun in the 80s and 90s and in the early 2000s. Your practice was thriving. It was good. For me personally, that was when it was the most enjoyable. But it just seems like recently, the industry's really been changing rapidly. And you have much more of concerns with insurances and third parties and the competition that's out there. It just wasn't quite as enjoyable for me. I still loved my patients, and that was the part of the practice I really enjoyed, was the time I got to spend with the patients. But it got to where the business side of the practice, I was spending more time doing that and less time enjoying the practice.
And probably worrying about that. Not only did Jeff spend a lot of time, it was probably stressful and worrisome to some extent.
Absolutely. No, I mean, when you're a single owner or a single practice owner, it all falls on you at the end of the day. And so you may have a great team, but ultimately you've got to make sure that you're following all the rules and regulations on the insurance and all like that. And it just gets to be where all of a sudden you're more running the business than doing patient care.
Doctor, tell us a little bit about, I know, but for our listeners and our colleagues around the country, tell us a little bit about the market you were in the Atlanta area specifically.
Yeah, no, I was in a great market. I was in right outside of Atlanta. We had a 30-year-old practice, and it was very successful, but we ended up probably finding out that we had lots of competition in the area. Because it was a desirable location, there was a lot of new optometrists that opened there. We got an awful lot of commercial optometrists. Within the 5-mile radius, we ended up getting a Costco and 2 Walmarts and a Lens Crafters, all within a 5-mile radius. And so that's what changed the dynamics. When you're in a real big city, it changes a lot on who your competition is and how you practice.
And it changes rather quickly, doesn't it?
Absolutely. No, all of that changed within probably a 10-year time span.
Right. So as you got from that 25-year mark on, those issues started to kind of become more important to you. And Doctor, what would you say, just looking back, what were some of the biggest concerns that you think that you wrestled with in thinking about selling your practice? Were you concerned about things like income, future income, the value of the business?
Yeah, the viability of the practice, future income, how it was going to stay profitable. As far as there's 2 scopes of that, how the practice is going to do and how is it going to affect me personally to start thinking of an exit plan. So your first
Right.
thing is, how's the practice going to do moving forward with all the changes going on? And then personally, how is that going to affect what my take home is, and how am I going to transition and make sure I'm making the right decision for both the practice and myself?
Yeah.
And another one of my big concerns in selling the practice was making sure that I got the most value for the practice. I wanted to make sure that whatever I sold it for was going to be the maximum that the practice was worth. Because, like myself and a lot of optometrists, our practice is our retirement fund. So we need to make sure that we're getting the most value for what we put into it after all those years. So that was one of the
Yes.
reasons why I needed somebody to help me, to make sure that I wasn't giving it away too cheaply.
Yes, absolutely. And Doctor, my father went to ICO back when it was the Northern Illinois College of Optometry, so many years ago. And he said they only told him two practice management ideas back then, and it only took about 5 minutes. One, your practice will be your retirement,
Yep.
and the other one was that in operating your practice, it'll be a third to overhead, third to cost of goods, and third to the doctor. And that was
Yep.
the extent of it. And today, of course, for many of our young optometrists, right? I think there's no question their practices will certainly be worth something in retirement, but probably will not be their full retirement.
Yeah.
But you're quite right, and I think that's one of the things that we're helpful, because there's really value of a practice can be a two-edged sword. You can either, on one hand, if you're not familiar with what a practice is worth, you may sell it for way less than it could command in the market, or maybe even worse. I've had several practices where the doctor had an unrealistic idea and expectation of that, and they lost a bona fide buyer and lost the opportunity to sell it because on the other extreme, they just were unrealistic about what a practice was worth. And part of that's driven by that need for retirement dollars. So I think getting somebody professionally to help you with that, so that you both don't lose a potential sale and at the same time maximize the dollars out of your practice is really helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. Great. And when you start thinking about that transition and who might be the logical person or persons to transfer the practice to, did you think about engaging professional help, someone like the Williams Group or others in that process?
I didn't initially, and that was probably, I was just rolling it around thinking about it for a little while, and then it got to be a little bit where I didn't want to do it myself. I wanted to get some help and guidance, because you hear so many things out there in the market. Like, you would go to conventions and conferences and regional meetings, and everybody's talking about selling their practice and what the options are out there. Well, it gets to be almost overwhelming, and you don't know what's the reality and what's the truth. And so that's where truthfully, I reached out to Williams and had you guys help guide me through what I needed to do, because I didn't have the relationships to engage in other private equities or other doctors or anything like that. So I didn't really know where to begin. I knew I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what my first step should be.
Oh, yes. And I think many of our colleagues, and I think you hit a very key thing. It seems like when we talk to doctors around the country, there is and whether it's just simply my selling the practice to a peer, another optometrist, or whether I'm thinking about engaging in private equity, there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding, misperceptions about what value is, whether a young optometrist can buy a practice today and get it financed. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about value as it relates certainly to private equity. People hear all these incredible stories about, practices you and I have had conversations with doctors who have thought they're going to get 5 times their revenue or 6 times their revenue because they don't necessarily understand how the private equity model is based on EBITDA and what adjusted EBITDA really is. So I was interested to hear you say that. And I think that sometimes is a value we as an advisor can bring to help kind of set the table and people's expectations about not only how this process works, but also, what they might expect in terms of value or financing. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your potential buyers?
Yeah, when I first we first started talking about selling the practice, I had two different avenues I could take. I had a private practice doctor that wanted to come in and expand, and so it was peer to peer to another optometrist. And then I had a private equity group that also approached me. So through our discussions, I've figured out and weighed out which one would be the best option. But those were the two avenues that I was considering which one would be the best.
When you were looking at the young optometrist, did you have several people interested in your practice in today's market, or?
It actually, it went pretty quick. I put it on the market in January, and March, I already had the two offers from the optometrist and the equity group. So I didn't really
Right.
have a lot of, it went pretty rapidly. So I didn't have multiple offers from another doctor.
Terrific. From the time you made that decision, say in March, how long was it till you were able to close the transaction and get paid and transfer ownership?
Probably 4 to 6 months.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I think it
So early
actually
fall,
closed
by the
in,
fall,
yeah, I think it
late
closed
August.
in August.
Oh, so that it moved around. It moved around rather quickly.
Yeah, it moved. Once it started going, it went pretty quickly.
Doctor, tell us a little bit about Marietta, where you had your practice for all those years.
Yeah, Marietta is a suburb just north of Atlanta. Uh, it's a great location. It's very family oriented. There's a lot of Lockheed's here, Dobbins Air Force Base, so it's a pretty well established. It's probably got 350,000 people in the area. It's a good community. It started out when I first started in practice, there were only 5 optometrists in the area, and now
Oh,
there's like over 20 private practices, and then all of the retail and the
corporate and
chains.
big
Yeah,
chain, big boxes. Wow.
yeah. But I
So
was
very
born and raised
vibrant.
right here. We've got Kennesaw Mountain. It's a great area.
Yeah, fantastic. Um, when what if you can remember back, your young buyer, as they were thinking about buying the practice, what were some of the biggest issues and concerns? I think it would be important for some of our, especially some of our doctors who might be thinking about selling a practice today, as well as maybe there's some younger doctors on the call today that might be thinking about buying a practice. But regardless of which one of those groups they're in, what did you think were, if you can remember back, what were some of the issues for that young doctor that was thinking about buying your practice? What was important to them?
The biggest thing for them was that I was going to stay on for a while afterwards. I stayed on for 3 years after we sold the practice so I could help in the transition. That was probably pretty important because they didn't want to, they were nervous that they were going to buy a practice and then I was going to be gone and that they wouldn't be having any continuity into the new care and coverage. So it was pretty important that I was there to help in the transition. And
Yes.
so I had an opportunity to introduce them to the patient base. We did some marketing and advertising, letting people know that they were taking over. So that was good. And then the other thing too was they wanted to make sure that financially they had the resources to buy it and that the cash flow would be there to help them offset the purchase price.
Right. And without getting into too many details, was it a cash, commercially financed so that you were cashed out when you
Yeah,
sold it?
I cashed
Yeah.
out. I didn't do any owner financing and they were able to get the financing for it.
Yes. Which, and as you know, in your work with this, in today's market, there are several great resources for, I think one of the big misnomers and things that we try to set the table on right away from the get-go, is just that financing is readily available for a young doctor to buy and to transition into a practice. At all the meetings, you and I will be at Vision Expo next week down in Orlando. And for those of you who are watching this, it may be there, Dr. Carman, I'd be happy to meet with you if you have concerns about transitioning your practice, but that's an aside. But one of the things I've noticed that sometimes you have to set the table straight on. Everybody thinks that because the young optometrists today carry so much student loan debt, which of course is absolutely correct, that will preclude them from being able to arrange commercial financing. And when we talk about commercial financing, of course, we're talking about someone like Wells Fargo or Bank of America or PNC or Vision One out in California. And they, as I explained to our clients and colleagues, they've already factored in the fact they know that a young doctor today has a substantial amount of student loan debt. What they're interested in is the practice they're thinking about buying, in this case yours. Does it have enough cash flow that the young doctor can pay themselves? And did they find that, without, again, we're not asking specific details here, but did they find that to be something that worked out well for them?
Yeah, they felt much more comfortable after they had looked at all of the revenue statements and tax returns, that there was enough there that they could afford to pay themselves and also the note back to the bank. So yeah, so they were able to do it.
And ultimately, doctor, not to embarrass you in front of our colleagues, that's a credit to you because you obviously ran a very successful practice. And would you be able to comment, if you can remember back, would you be able to comment, what were some of the things that the bank required and that they, because I always tell, you and I have been on calls with doctors, and I always try to tell them that selling a practice, whether you're selling it to another optometrist, whether you're selling it to a medical group or ophthalmologist, whether you're selling it to private equity, and certainly private equity falls squarely in this camp. There's a lot of information that's asked of the selling doctor that sometimes can be off-putting, or I think sometimes doctors think it's a little bit of an intrusion. But since it's my business, I'm the one that has all the financial. Can you comment on some of the things that were required that you had to provide to your buyer?
At the time, and it did. I remember thinking, what do they need all this information for? But like I gave them my last 3 years tax returns, my monthly P&Ls for like the 3 years prior, a list of inventory of everything that I had in stock, my frame evaluation, equipment. I mean, all of that. And I had to do listing, if any of them was leased, if they were paid off, the age, amortization tables, all of that.
Yeah, so quite a bit of information.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it took a while to pull it all together.
Yeah, was the financing piece of the transaction, after say the purchase price and all of that was negotiated, did it take 60 to 70 days to get financing approved, or was it longer, do you think? Or do you remember?
I don't remember exactly, but it was definitely a pretty good while. And I kept thinking, it took longer than I was expecting, but I would say it definitely took 30 to 60 days.
Yeah, I always tell doctors, plan on about 60 days minimum for the financing, because sometimes just when you think it's all done, there'll be one more piece of information the bank will ask. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's what I was going to say is, even when you think it's done and you've done all of that, they'll come up with and ask for something else. And it's like, oh my goodness. So that's where you'll list all your equipment, and all of a sudden you'll realize one of it is showing on your tax return that it's still, you're still financing it. And so you have to show when this payoff date is, and will that be paid off prior to closing and all of that.
Yeah, great. Doctor, tell us a little bit about life after. I think some doctors, I had my first call this morning was with a colleague, and he's just now starting to think about selling his practice. And I had a call yesterday from a doctor in Arizona that I helped transition his practice, and he seems to be, I think, much happier than he thought he was going to be. As you said, he's very happy, loves to see his patients. He's still working 3 days a week, but he's out from that ultimate responsibility of owning the business. Could you comment a little bit for our listeners today?
Yeah, absolutely.
What that's been like, life after?
Once selling the practice. It was the right decision for me at the right time. It really gives you a lot of flexibility and freedom that I don't think you realize what you've lost from running the practice for so long. I went back to school and got my MBA before I did this. So because I wasn't ready to totally retire, but it allowed you to have other opportunities and other avenues, whether you want to just totally kick back and do nothing, or you can still do something else on the side. It's the freedom and the flexibility that you finally have, that you can enjoy and do whatever it is you really want to do.
That you're not just tied to that exam room.
You are not tied to the office at all. You can get out and do what you really enjoy doing.
Doctor, tell us a little bit about what have you done since you sold I know you worked in the practice for 3 years. And then tell us a little bit about your background.
I did a couple of different things. Part of my career was working at TLC Laser Eye Center. And I went from selling my practice to working for them and as director of patient services. And since I was familiar with LASIK, all of a sudden I was dealing with patients and unhappy patients. And it was a great opportunity to do something outside of the clinic, but yet use my skills that I had when I was working in the practice. So, things you never thought about doing are now opportunities that you have to do. So that would be the first thing. I did that for 2 years after I got out of selling the practice.
Fantastic. And now?
And now I'm real excited to say I've joined Williams Marketing and transitioning and acquisitions of practices, which is what I wanted to do when I first sold my practice, but it wasn't the right time. So timing is everything.
Right. Timing is everything.
And I'm really looking forward to it because I love working with the numbers and the business side of a practice. And I think that, it's an opportunity for everybody to really consider. So I'm looking really forward to it.
Yes, as we are as well. And Dr. Carman, you bring a big breadth of, you have a big footprint in the industry, and you have a large breadth of knowledge and diverse background that I think will be a real help to our clients. We're certainly excited to have you. And first of all, we want to thank you for taking time out of your busy day, Dr. Carman, to be with us today. I think your insights on just your experience in transitioning a practice probably will resonate with a lot of our listeners today, and probably a lot of people are thinking those same things. And I think it's reassuring to hear that, you and I were on a call earlier today with a potential client that was, you could just sense the anxiety in their voice as they were thinking about all the issues that are kind of germane to the transitioning of a practice. And I think you being on the phone with her today and being able to reassure them that, transitioning is, it's part of the experience. There's a lot of I's dot and T's to cross, but we've had a lot of experience doing it, and we're really looking forward to being able to bring your experience to our clients as well.
Absolutely, looking forward to it.
We as well. Doctors, thank you very much. Again, I want to thank all of you for dialing in and viewing the webinar with us today. If you have any questions about anything we discussed, or you'd like to talk to Dr. Carman or I, we'd be happy to do so. And I believe our contact information will come up here at the end. Thanks again, and have a great day. And a special thanks to our marketing director, Megan, who arranged to get this all up and recorded. So thanks to you as well, Megan.